I kind of play the role of the forensic realtor, where I'm trying to peel apart the layers that made up the house over time, try to figure out what the systems are, try to see behind the drywall what's going on structurally. All these things together, I think, help the buyer make a better decision.
The wrapping of the present may be pretty, but is the present inside broken, or
That's
is
right,
it still intact? Hello, hello!
Hey, Gabby, how are you?
I'm good, Arn. How are you? It's so good to see you. Thank you for joining us today. I'm so excited. Your background is incredibly diverse, spanning from engineering, real estate, and adventures around the continent. And I'm so lucky to have you driving me around Boulder, Colorado.
Well, thank you. This is North Boulder Park over here. So in the wintertime, this becomes a ski area where you can ski.
Everyone goes sledding, skiing.
That's right. Well, there's a snowmobile that carves out a perfect skate skiing area. And
really?
Skate skiing.
Is that somebody in the neighborhood that does that? Or is that the...
Yeah, it's one of the volunteers in the neighborhood. It's a volunteer process.
Versus Texas, we barely have plow trucks for snow.
Yeah. Well, actually, the city of Boulder doesn't have much in the way of plow trucks either.
Really?
When it snows in Boulder, the city is the worst off. All the county roads typically are plowed by the county, and the county is well equipped for major snowstorms. When there's a major snowstorm in Boulder, a street like this would be hard to get through.
So when it snows, are there snow days for school?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
That's always fun.
When you talk to the kids, they don't think there's enough of them, but there's definitely snow days. Well, there's a lot to talk about. So let's find out what you're most interested in first.
I wanted to ask real quick.
Yeah.
Real quick, do you think this is in or out? So, would you say that a rustic mountain style home, are they still popular?
I would say yes. I just sold one in Evergreen that is massively mountain style, big gigantic logs and beams and big tall ceiling, and that was the appeal. So it depends on the environment, right? This house that I'm talking about was on the top of a mountain, 10 acres. Every property up there had minimum 10 acres, so pretty far apart from the neighboring homes, and surrounded by tall pine trees. And so the mountain house made total sense.
Mm-hmm.
There are areas in Boulder County, for example, if you go further north, where the environment feels a little bit like New Mexico. It feels desert-like almost. In those areas, you'll see a lot of southwestern style homes, and they're in Boulder County, very close by. But it's a style home that fits that environment pretty well.
So you get the best of both worlds. And then would you say that smart kitchens? Are people looking for smart kitchens these days?
I think people are looking for high-end appliances. Convection ovens are popular. Anything that allows you to cook and change the temperature quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So a high-end gas stove, a high-end electric stove. The idea of every appliance being programmable, I don't know. I just don't see much. I don't see much demand for it. I'm not sure why a refrigerator has to be Wi-Fi enabled. I have a feeling that some of those technologies are going to go the same direction as RG58 internet cabling in the house and hardwired telephones and a lot of these smart homes from even 10 years ago are now obsolete technology, and so I think some of that stuff is just gimmicky. Now a furnace that is Wi-Fi enabled that you can control remotely, especially for somebody who travels, goes out of town,
or a second home
that can monitor, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
But I think, again, back to the refrigerator or back to the stove. I mean, if you're cooking, if you want the heat up, you turn it up. But why the stove would have to be Wi-Fi enabled, I don't know.
Right.
It doesn't
You would
make
hope
sense.
that no one's cooking when they're not home.
That's right. That's right.
Now, with like the COVID and everyone staying inside and now being back out, are you still seeing home wellness centers being like a big...
Yeah, it somewhat depends where people come from. I mean, Boulder has so many health clubs. We've got 4 really good rec centers in Boulder that if they're coming from Houston and they're used to having a home gym and maybe a big backyard for private, for
Classes.
privacy, for privacy's sake, they want to have a big backyard for their own parties. They want to have their own gym so they can work out indoors. Some of that appeal might be there for somebody to buy the house, but whether they actually use it or not is a different question.
Well, right. That's like buying a gym membership. Will you use it? We'll see.
Well, and we have a lot of competitive athletes here in Boulder, and I think a lot of them like to be in an environment where there's other athletes that they can pace themselves against. So, like private lap pool, for example.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a swimmer, yeah, you can go out and get a workout on your own, but it sure helps to have a guy in the lane next to you swimming a little bit faster
Just
than
a little
you
bit, yeah.
to motivate you to go faster, right? And so I think a lot of serious athletes would prefer to go to a place where there's other athletes working out.
Mm-hmm. Now, would you say, are there specialized pet features you're seeing in homes these days, like their pet?
Yeah, I mean, dog wash stations are pretty common.
Ah, they are?
Oh, pretty common. We typically see them either near the back door or near the garage.
The mudroom. Ah.
Yeah, we have dogs that they go out all year round, and sometimes we have mud season, sometimes we have snow outside. So it's nice to be able to shower your dog off. I have a house that I built, was one of the last homes I built, that has it has a full-fledged door to go outside and it has an outdoor shower.
Wow.
For humans, but then it also has a dog door. But yeah, dogs are a big part of a lot of people's lives, and more and more we're seeing stuff for the dogs. So for me, the optimum house for somebody would entail studying all those different elements, right? And one of the elements is maybe the style of house, whether it's modern or traditional, but window orientation, shape of the rooms, orientation of the rooms, the heating system or cooling system has to be studied before the house goes in. And most builders don't do a very good job of that. They fall short on quite a few of the things that they look at. For example, in Boulder, we have high wind days, and we've always had them. We've had them since I've been here in the 70s. And on a high wind day, you really appreciate a house that's designed to slice into the wind. And that's especially true when you're looking at mountain properties. Mountain properties in Boulder, we have small subdivisions in the mountains, but we have a lot of homes that are on old mining claims. And mining claims typically don't sit by themselves. A mining claim is typically a long rectangular piece of property designed around the vein that the mine follows down below, and not necessarily the surrounding surface area. And so when you're looking at a mining claim, they never sit on their own. There's always other mining claims nearby. When each mining claim was registered, they may have rights, surface rights, that there might be a conflict. And so you have to do quite a bit of research to figure out what the hierarchy is of mining claims and who owns what. So you might think you have a solid, long rectangle of property, but there might be an intersection of another mining claim with an earlier date, and it'll carve away part of what you think you own. So there's a lot of research to be done on that. And then there's water issues. We have, because of climate change, we have some issues with certain water tables dropping, and water purity is another issue. If there's a lot of mining activity, there might be issues with water purity. So there's a lot of things to investigate.
Mm. Whenever you're in the water zone, would that be called like a flood zone, or is there a different term for it?
When I'm talking about water in the mountains, I'm talking about well water,
Underneath.
underground water.
Mm.
And then in the city of Boulder, we have floodplain issues. I mean, the city of Boulder is at the mouth of a canyon, but that canyon has all kinds of tributary canyons that feed it. So when we have massive rainfalls, we collect water from an entire region, basically the whole county. So the city of Boulder has a lot of properties that are in the 100-year floodplain,
Mm.
and some of them are in what they call the conveyance zone, which is the zone where debris would be traveling down in a 100-year flood. So if you're buying a house that's in the 100-year floodplain, it's worth doing a bunch of research to find out how the house, if it's protected at all, how the house is protected against a potential flood. So there's a lot of things to
Investigate.
A lot of things to investigate. And so I like being on the sell side of real estate, and I enjoy being on the buy side. And on the buy side, I like it because there's all these layers of an onion that you have to peel apart to get to what's
The heart.
really going on. Exactly.
Well, tell me about this property we're about to see.
Okay, so this property was built 1907. It's a old historic house. It's been added onto back in the 40s. It lives like a modern house. It's very well insulated. It's got modern mechanicals, but it feels like an old historic house. And most of the finishes inside are original.
I can't wait to see it.
Okay.
All right. Surprise room was really, I think, my favorite. The cherry on top. Where are we headed to next?
So I was going to take you to Zamia. That's my other listing on the opposite end of town. But I was going to drive kind of the back streets instead of driving down Broadway.
Why do you like taking the back streets?
That's a good question. I actually never drive from point A to point B the same way twice in a row. I like mixing it up.
Mm-hmm.
Boulder is a good city to do that in. Have you ever heard of a concept called living systems approach towards design and towards architecture and towards development?
I can guess that it means that it situates the architecture around the style of living that the people want to participate in.
Well, that's one of the layers. That's one of the elements.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, create all these layers of analysis on a project before you build it. I learned about it when I was doing a pro bono project in Baja. A friend of mine came out. His name's Ray Lucchesi, and he basically guided our whole group to adhere to a concept called living systems approach. And the living systems approach basically assumes that the project that you're working on, whether it's a house or whether it's a development or whether it's an entire region, is a living system. So this is one of the homes that I designed and built.
Gorgeous.
And it's currently going through a remodel. I'm helping the owners buy the property next door so that they can expand their house into next door. And I think homes that are well designed take all that into account. It goes back to that living systems approach. I think a lot of Boulder buyers are intrigued by the idea of having an efficient house, even though it might be a large house. For example, really sophisticated mechanical rooms quite often become a bragging point for a buyer, and they really like that. Whereas in other places, the mechanical room might not be looked at much.
And whenever you said you like focus on the orientation of windows, what would you say is like the best orientation for a window to be at? Do you think that there's a best?
That's another really good question. We ran into that all the time. There's a traditional placement of a window, which is typically in the middle of a room. But if that window's facing a view, maybe you don't want the mosquito screening on it. Maybe you don't want the opening mechanism. Maybe you just want a big pane of glass so that you can see out and see the view.
Right.
But on the other hand, if it's a window that's critical for ventilation, then you want it to be opening. So I think windows should be thought of by form follows function rules, where you basically design the window and place it so that it performs the function that it's supposed to perform. So in the case of the house that we just passed, for example, the opening windows are low, so they're awning windows, and then there's big picture windows above, because that's where our views are. We're looking at the Flatirons, so we want a view over the park and the Flatirons in the background. So we have the windows down below that open, and then the picture windows up above. On the back side of the house, the views are to the backyard, so the windows with the picture view are lower, and the opening windows for the awning are higher. And the idea is that at night, the house cools down by bringing in cold air through the lower windows on the west side, and through natural convection, the air flows out east side.
That's a very popular trend going on right now, where people are really wanting that oxygen air circulated through their homes. Are you seeing that very popular in Boulder in particular?
Yeah, right. And for that same reason in Boulder, for an out-of-state buyer, air conditioning is always on the top of their list. But
I would also do that. From Texas, we need our AC.
Everybody thinks about AC, and so for resale purposes, typically you put in AC. But from a comfort point of view, because we have natural airflow anyway, and a lot of people live with their windows and doors open quite often, swamp coolers are popular. And so if you're designing a house for resale value, you probably want to put in air conditioning, because most people will come in wanting air conditioning. But from a pure comfort point of view, swamp cooler might be a better choice.
So what is a swamp cooler? What is the particulars?
Well, a swamp cooler, basically, our air here is really dry, generally. Not today necessarily because it's raining, but it's generally dry. So having dry air, if you add moisture to the air, it tends to cool through convection and evaporation, and that creates a cooling effect. So a swamp cooler basically brings in fresh air from outside. Through a membrane, it humidifies it and then puts it into the house. And so it's at that point, it's high energy air. It's got a lot of water molecules floating around in it, and it's looking for a low pressure zone to move to, so it tends to want to go outside. So if you're in a house and you have a swamp cooler, if you open a window, that cold, moist air will travel through that room and then back out the window. So you can create little convection circulation areas within the house just by opening and closing windows. And so for somebody who's trying to live in a clean air environment and wants fresh air from the outside, swamp coolers are great. And then it's also great because it's humidifying the air, so if you have pollen in the air and so on, it tends to reduce the pollen, tends to make it more comfortable. Yeah, well, this house on a normal day has really nice views of the Flatirons right over here.
I saw it. Absolutely gorgeous, the mountain right there.
Yeah.
Is it their backyard?
No, there's one block over, and then from there on it's open space. So it's a great place to live if you have a dog that you need to walk. There's a beautiful trail system up here. There's a bike path, single track bike path that you could ride from here all the way into downtown. Great hiking trails. It's a little bit different subclimate. I mean, it's usually a little bit cooler in the wintertime, a little bit cooler in the summertime. This gets a little bit more sun out here.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited to check it out.
Okay.
That house was gorgeous. With your extensive experience, where do you see the essential value of real estate agents for a buyer and seller during a transaction?
There are people who buy homes like they buy cars, strictly to get from point A to point B. They buy a house strictly for the purpose of having a place to sleep at night and cook a meal and then leave the next day. And so I put those into the category of, those are commodity homes. They're homes that are just there for the purpose of providing a place to sleep. And then there are luxury homes, and luxury isn't necessarily locked to a price point. Luxury to me implies getting something beyond the basics, getting something that makes your life extra special.
Mhm.
So a luxury home could be a very simple home with an incredible view. That could be the definition of luxury, or it could be really nice finishes, or it could be some amenity or some feature of the house that makes your life special. And so if you're talking about those kind of homes, I think a buyer's agent is extra important. We can sift through all that. Once we understand what our client's looking for, we can sift through all the options and really come up with solutions that are a good match. So we're a good matchmaker that way. So for me, when I'm representing somebody as a buyer's agent, my first role is to really understand my client and really understand what it is that they're looking for. And even if they don't know what they're looking for, try to figure out what they're looking for, what might be a good match for their values or what they think is important or what they appreciate.
You got to dig a little.
You got to dig a little.
Figure out their ticks, figure out their icks and their loves.
Yeah, that part of it's always going to be critical. A buyer's agent will always know the inventory and always know the market better than the client that's coming in trying to find a home. There are exceptions. There are certain buyers who don't need a buyer's agent, who know the area, know the inventory, know the market trends, but those buyers are rare. And when they're not represented, they can sometimes make big mistakes. And I've got two examples of that in mind. They ended up going under contract without a buyer's agent on the house across the street. They thought they were getting a great deal. They had the buyer agent fee credited towards the purchase, so they thought they got a screaming deal by not having anybody represent them.
Right.
2 weeks after they moved in, they put it back on the market again because they realized they had made a big mistake. And there were elements about the house that they weren't aware of until after they moved in. All that should have come out during inspection. They chose to do a quick close, cash, and represent themselves. And there were things that they found out about the house later that a good broker would have pointed out and probably would have steered them away from. But instead they bought it. And I've got another person in the same situation, and she realizes that there's too many stairs in the house for her, and the dog has to go down 2 flights of stairs to go outside, and she can't live that lifestyle. And this is all stuff where if she had just been coached properly by the right broker, she probably would have thought about that. And so I've had lots of clients where even to the point where we've gone under contract, where after we really look at the details on the house while we're under contract during the due diligence and inspection period, we come to the conclusion that they probably shouldn't buy that house, and I've advised them not to buy it. Those can be really expensive mistakes. So back to your point, is the buyer broker ever going to go away? No, I don't think so. Is a broker who's used to transactions only, commodity type sales, who doesn't know much about the house, doesn't care much about the house, will those survive? Yeah, they may have a harder time.
Right.
But if you're providing full service, I think those brokers will continue to be around.
Your clients are very lucky for your full service.
We're not going to enter this house.
Okay, got you. Would you say, who would be looking at this house?
This house is a really well done mid-century modern. You can't appreciate it, but it's got gigantic windows facing that way, and the city of Boulder's down there. So at night especially, the whole city of Boulder is visible from here. Basically built it with industrial materials to last forever. So if you walk through the house, there's not a crack in the drywall. Everything's
immaculate.
Perfect. Yeah. The thing about this house is that it's going to appeal to somebody who likes mid-century modern. Everything, including the kitchen, is probably just exactly the way somebody would want it if they like mid-century modern. But it has some wear and tear on it. The house has been lived in and probably needs some refreshing in some areas. Bathrooms probably need to be refreshed and so on. So this house is going to appeal to somebody who has the vision.
Do you find it's hard or easy to help a client have vision for things that can be done?
That's actually one of my specialties, because I'm fairly good at costing things out and understanding what things cost.
Do you feel like that's the biggest hurdle in people's minds for like acceptance of an update is the cost?
Yeah, well, that's a bring up a good point. I always tell people when they're looking at homes, and I tell my sellers this too, because it's really important to understand this. The buyer shows up with 2 lists in hand. And I don't know if you've ever heard this analogy before, but in my opinion, the buyer shows up with 2 lists. One list has all the check boxes of all the things that they want in a house, and the more of those you can check off, the better.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other list is a blank list, doesn't have anything on it. And as they walk through the house, they start to build up that list, and these are all the things that they would have to change in order to make the house theirs.
Mm-hmm.
And the longer that list gets, the less appealing the house becomes.
Right.
And different buyers have different thresholds. For some buyers, it's 1 or 2 major items on that list, and it's no longer acceptable. Others are willing to take on more of a project.
Mm-hmm.
But helping them understand what that list actually translates to in terms of cost and time is where I come in. I can give them a pretty good idea in ranges of what certain things will cost. So if they want to move a wall, I can tell pretty quickly if it's a structural wall or not. I do have contacts from framing to concrete to drywall to finishes to paint. I still have relationships with all those subs.
Now, this is just like a fun question for you, but if you were to open an extravagant open house and you could have a musical artist, any musical artist, who would you have perform there? And also, where in the house would you have them perform?
That's a good question. And again, I hate to always bring up depends, but it really depends on the house.
Yes.
If it's a house that basically oozes serenity and calmness, I'd probably have Yo-Yo Ma playing violin.
Ooh, yes.
And I would possibly have him playing near the wine cellar or near someplace where you would be hanging out with friends. If it's a house that is designed for entertaining and so on, I might put in a quartet or maybe bluegrass band. It really all it depends.
What's the music scene in Boulder like?
It's not the music scene of Austin, Texas, I can tell you that. I don't think anything will ever match Austin, Texas. We don't have as much live music as we did back in the 70s. It's our bars and restaurants and hotels that have music at certain times. For example, the St. Julian Hotel, Friday afternoons, typically has live music, and it's usually danceable music in the lobby, and people come together there.
Is there a specific dance that's like very popular?
Salsa tends to be super popular.
Oh!
It's not the kind of thing I would participate in.
They need an intro class.
Boulder has so many extremely talented athletes in general, and salsa dancing falls right into that category. So when you go to one of these casual salsa dance get-togethers, it's pretty intimidating. The guys that are out there dancing are really, really good. And
you watch and you go, I don't think I could do that.
I'm pretty sure that I can't even come close.
Were you thinking about sports? What's the biggest sport for athletes that come to Boulder?
Well, we have a lot of cyclists. We have a lot of runners. For example, there's a Japanese national team that lives in Boulder that they rotate Japanese athletes through all the time. We have incredible skiers and lots of people that ski. We've got Coach Prime in town, right? So, but he's quite the inspiration. He's a very accomplished athlete, but he's an incredible coach. And so he's brought the whole town back into CU football mode. All of a sudden, football season is sold out, and tickets are impossible to get, and the games are chock full. And so there's a whole energy now around football that we hadn't had for a while. So it's really nice.
Why would cyclists come to Boulder versus Denver?
Because there's so many great places to train. Denver has a lot more traffic, a lot less places to ride.
Would you say that there's a specific trail that is the most popular in Boulder for bikes?
Well, there's depends what you're talking about. If you're talking about mountain biking, we have some incredible mountain bike areas, and they're all popular. Petasso is one. Petasso is a wildlife preserve area that has a really nice figure eight. Takes a couple hours to ride it. Running through it, there's Heil Ranch and just north of Boulder. But then for road riding, we have, for example, the $1 Million Highway between North Boulder and Lyons. They call it the $1 Million Highway because on any given Sunday, there'll be over $1 million worth of bicycles riding up and down the road.
Bikes can be costly, and it really makes a difference what kind of bike you ride.
Well, in this town, it's so common to have a $2,000 car driving around with a $15,000 bike on the roof. People spend their money on the bike, not on the car.
That's funny. We got the flashy item above.
Right. Yeah, and even this car, I've got a bike rack on the roof. Everybody's got a bike rack. Everybody's got a way to carry their toys.
But whenever we're looking at marketing, how would you say the shift as you've seen it? How would you describe that shift in marketing?
I think in general, we have far more tools. We have much higher quality photography. I listed one of my first homes, and I met a guy who was working for Google to beta test software that eventually I think became the METAPORT licensed version. But at the time, it was basically they took the Google Earth View software that the vehicles drive around, showed everybody in the office a METAPORT tour through it, and the initial feedback was nobody's going to want to use that. It's too complicated. It's not something that they're going to be comfortable with. And now every house that I list has METAPORT in it, and it allows my clients to go in and not only zoom in on certain areas, but they can zoom in. If they want to know what brand the refrigerator is, they can go into the kitchen, zoom in on the refrigerator, and actually see what refrigerator it is. And so technologically, we have the capability now of showing a house to somebody who's in a totally different country, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So, like the house I was mentioning earlier today up in Evergreen, we had people fly in from Germany who basically had seen the house not only through advertising, but online through METAPORT, had already toured the whole house. And by the time they toured it in person, they felt like they'd already been there. And from us syndicating it here from the United States into all these different channels. So our exposure is much bigger.
Right.
So to
list with the international realty of Sotheby's, you get international exposure for syndication.
We do. And so it ends up in all kinds of luxury magazines and places that we personally have never even heard of, but they exist in different countries. So there might be a Greek luxury home magazine, and our homes will be featured in it because of the syndication that we do. So the exposure that we get is something that historically wasn't there before. So I think that's a big change too.
I am very impressed by just your knowledge and your overall approach to dealing with clients, making sure that they get their needs met and also figure out exactly what their needs are in the first place. But as you've worked with buyers and sellers, what is like the negotiation lessons that you've learned as you've navigated negotiating with multiple different listings and on behalf of your clients?
I can give you an example of that, for example. But do you want to hear an example?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, please.
So once we completed this sale, I actually had brokers calling me for weeks afterwards saying, "How did you get this guy to sell this property? Because we never thought he would sell it." So one of my buyers wanted to buy a property. It happened to be a commercial property, and we talked to the owner, and the owner of the property said, "Yeah, I'll sell it." And then we threw a price out there, and he went back and forth a little bit, and he said, "No, I want a little bit more." And so we agreed on the price. We sent him the contract, and then he chose not to sign it. And I was working on this one with another broker, and the other broker basically said, "Look, this is never going to happen. We've been dealing with this guy for years. He's just not. He's never going to sell this property." And I came out and said, let's take a totally different approach. Let's just take the guy out for a cup of coffee, and just have a conversation with him, and let's not make it the conversation about his, this property that we want him to sell.
Right.
Let's just find out what he's all about. And sure enough, we sit down and we have a conversation with him, and we actually had to do it virtually because he was worried about his wife getting sick. But we did a Zoom meeting with him, and we, within a couple minutes, it turns out that his wife has Alzheimer's. He's worried about the future and what that's going to look like with her, and he's worried about what her life is going to be like. I mean, is he going to have to modify his house to have her live there? I mean, all these questions came up, and that's basically all I had to hear. I realized this guy, the reason he didn't want to commit to selling the house was twofold. It was his wife and the insecurity, and then what also came out in this conversation was that he didn't want to have a huge capital gains hit at the very beginning from selling the property, because he'd purchased it a long time ago and there was a lot of capital gains on it. So that's all I had to hear. So
Right.
we came back and said, okay, price isn't the issue. The issue is, he's going to need a large amount of money to take care of his wife, and he might need that at some point. And he's worried about capital gains, which is the opposite of that. He wants to basically disperse his income over a long period of time. So we put a proposal together. We offered to pay it off in 10 years, in 10 one-year payments. And at any point, if he needed the money with a 6 months notice, we would pay off the entire balance. So it gave him the flexibility of money when he needed it, if he needed it in a hurry, and it gave him a long period of time to receive the money, so he wouldn't have as high a capital gains hit on it. And it was exactly what he was looking for. We threw that out. It was signed right away, and then we were under contract. So it all had to do with fully understanding what the situation is that the other party is in. Threw a proposal out that solved all those problems. Then all of a sudden, his fundamental objections became more clear to him. The most important thing is to fully understand what the real need is. And there's a tendency to always think that it's price, or always think that it's objections. Let's submit this offer without inspection. Well, maybe he doesn't care if there's an inspection. Maybe he doesn't care if there's a survey or not. Those things may not even be on his radar. But there might be something else that we don't know about. And so doing research, really trying to understand where somebody's about, and just having conversation with them, and the conversation is probably the most valuable of all that, brings all that stuff to light. So does that make sense?
Yes, that's a great answer, and I also think that's a great example. Can you let us get here, and how can we do it together?
Yeah, and the whole idea of win-win, I think, is very real in business negotiation. I think it's the only way to go. If both parties don't feel like they're winning, it's probably not going to happen. And I find that even the most confrontational, if I'm dealing with a very confrontational broker on the other side, the solution is usually not for me to become more confrontational. I can become confrontational if I want,
Right.
but it's not generally the way to a common goal, I think.
Excellent. I have asked nearly every question, but when you moved to Boulder, Colorado, it's clear that you've become very passionate about the city. What is something that's your favorite thing about Boulder?
One of the favorite things is the diversity in Boulder. Just the people from all over the place that come here. When I say diversity, I mean diversity in terms of ideas and diversity in terms of backgrounds. We're not the most diversity from a racial point of view, and Boulder's been criticized for that, and that's changing. But what I'm talking about on the diversity side is diversity of ideas. I love the idea of Hare Krishnas on the mall, Buddhist monks traveling up and down, beating a drum, making people aware of, Rocky Flats up north, building nuclear bomb triggers. All these things that make Boulder weird is kind of what I like about Boulder. And then there's the environment. A lot of people move here because of the mountains and all the stuff that you do. Boulder's constantly being talked about as being one of the happiest places in the country, and I don't think moving to Boulder necessarily makes you happy. I think there's people that Boulder doesn't work for. But what Boulder is it's a collection of people that really enjoy a certain lifestyle, and Boulder allows that lifestyle to happen. And so, we're very like-minded, even though there's a diversity in backgrounds. We're very like-minded in that we like healthy food, we like doing healthy activities, we like breathing clean air. So those are the things that make us happy, and therefore we're happy. If you like a really active nightlife and casinos and stuff like that, you're not going to find it in Boulder, and so you probably wouldn't be very happy here.
Keeping it weird and healthy.
Yeah.
The Boulder lifestyle.
That's pretty cool, actually.
Yes.
I should get one of these.
Absolutely, because I feel like you guys do the best talking in the car.
So this is the receiver for the microphone?
Yes.
Okay.
And then it's connected to my phone.
And it's not using the phone's microphone anymore. It's using just this one.
Correct.
So does it hear you too?
Yep.
Oh, you.
Alrighty. See you in a minute.